food price inflation has been on the decline in recent months in South Africa, indicating some relief for households that have been negatively affected by global and local factors. According to Statistics SA figures released in June, consumer price inflation cooled from 6.3% in May to 5.4% in June, the lowest reading since 5.0% in October 2021. Crucially, annual inflation for food and non-alcoholic beverages, one of the main drivers of high inflation levels, continued its downward trend, dropping from 11.9% in May to 11.0% in June. However, there are still some concerns about the long-term stability of food prices, even as criticisms have greeted several policies of the South African government. So this morning, joining me from Durban, South Africa, is Mervyn Abrahams, Programs Coordinator, Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group. Thank you so much, Mervyn, for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So this reads like cherry news for South Africans when, according to figures released in June, consumer price inflation cooled from 6.3 in May to 5.4 in June. So what is responsible for the food price decline, inflation decline as the case is, and how does CPI in June 2023 compare to the reading that was recorded in October 2021?
So thank you. So what we have seen is we've seen a kind of a decline of some of our major foods based on declining global commodity prices, as well as declining fuel prices globally. And that has contributed to a kind of a cooling down of some of the foods that South Africans tend to eat. But the picture is a bit more complex and nuanced, because when you look at a very small basket specifically designed for low-income and working-class households, then we see that basket of food continue to increase. While if you look at the statistical basket of food as measured by Stats SA, which includes many foods that many low-income households will not buy, then you see a little bit difference in terms of the inflation statistics. So the basket of food that we track, which is a 44 foods that is definitely consumed by households on a monthly basis, there we see the inflation is still sitting at 7%. And we even saw a rand value increase of 25 rand over the last month. So the affordability issue and the food price issue remains a crisis for low-income households in South Africa.
So does that mean that that would not have any positive effect for households and even for consumers who may have to purchase some certain basic amenities? Does that mean that they will not benefit or have any significant change in their spendings?
So it depends really on where you are located in the South African economy. As you know, Liko, South Africa has the highest inequality measure globally. About 60% of all our wages in South Africa go to the top 10% of wage earners, and the rest to the other 90%. So it depends really on where you are located in the South African economy. If you are located in the top 10%, then you will definitely feel the pressure of food prices dropping. But if you are located in the lowest 30 or 40% of income in the South African economy, then for you, life has not significantly changed at all, actually. Because when we look at income versus food expenditure, then we see that the affordability crisis continue. So if I might just give you an example, the national minimum wage in South Africa, and we know that more than 60% of workers earn at that level, that would have brought home a wage of something like 4,500 rand. when we look at the cost of the basket that we track of 44 foods, then the cost of that basket is still standing at over 5,000 Rand. So you couldn't even take your entire national minimum wage and buy that basket of food. And that is why we say that for the lowest levels of income earners in South Africa, their situation has not changed.
So now that we're recording these imbalances and, well, even as we see the decline in the numbers, should we still be concerned about the stability of food prices in the country? Because some people are wondering if there would be a stable price that will cut across whichever divide, whichever economic divide citizens of South Africa are placed, if there will be some sort of a stability or parity in what is being priced in markets.
So when we look at future stability, there are good factors. So as I've mentioned, global commodity prices have come down, particularly cereals, particularly oils. And of course, that is good news for the South African economy. Also, we have seen that fuel prices have either come down or it's increased at lower levels. So those are all good news factors and should indicate that a continuing decrease of food prices. However, there are some specific factors to the South African economy, and one of the major problems, of course, is load shedding, is instability of electricity supply. And that is having an impact from the farmer who needs electricity for irrigation of his or her farms, right through the production and manufacturing line, right through to the retailers who have to, of course, keep food in cool storage. So that load shedding is something that we at this stage cannot predict. It's how it would play itself out. And if we can get load shedding under control, it is our view that over the next year, we should see prices significantly coming down.
All right, so aside from load shedding, which of course is an offshoot of the power crisis in the country, what about changing weather conditions and of course droughts? How would that impact food supply and consequently affect food prices in the country?
Yes, exactly as you were saying. We are expecting from this year and going into next year, much more drier weather conditions. And that will have an impact, particularly on fresh vegetables. So currently we are seeing that, for instance, potatoes, which is a staple in South Africa, and onions, which are also almost a staple food, we've seen them increase by well over 50% in comparison to last year. And so we are expecting that, depending on the weather condition and the drier climate that is expected, that particularly in the fresh vegetable part of our food basket, that we could possibly see increases there. But if the war in Ukraine, and if Ukraine, for instance, can export even more cereals, wheat, sunflower seeds, corn, which will keep global prices down, then that might offset some of the increasing prices we are expecting because of climate change and climate conditions.
All right, we are seeing these intrusions from the global markets and the dictates and, of course, atmospheric conditions that might not be favorable for South Africa at this time. But then I want to relay you, or I want to share with you this particular summation. Now, the co-chair of the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, that is Gareth Ackerman, expressed concerns about how new government policies could lead to serious economic problems, including job losses, food insecurity, and bank failures. So what policies is he actually referring to? What are the attendant effects at the backdrop of these harsh economic realities that South Africa is faced with?
So by and large, the policies that he will likely refer to would have to be policies around land ownership. There has always been this question since the dawn of democracy in South Africa, whether white farm owners' land is secure. As far as we are concerned, that is not a policy issue. If you're black in South Africa, then you say, well, what's the problem? we know that the farmers' lands are secured. So that's often raised by business. It is not being shared by the general public and by the research community. There are, of course, other policy areas, and that touches on, for instance, energy, ensuring a constant energy supply and a cheap energy supply, which we don't have. So that is another policy area. And then, of course, policy areas around foreign investment, attracting investment to South Africa. And of course, that has to do with confidence in the South African economy and very often connected to some political posturing, particularly on the eve of an election as we have coming up next year, a kind of a populist economic policy which drives investors away. So those are some of the issues that he might very well be referring to. But one of the issues that we would put on the table in terms of policy and economic policy is the historical low wage trajectory which we have inherited from the apartheid era and which persists today. So wages for working class households remain extremely low. And that is one of the reasons why we do not have sufficient demand in the South African economy, because there is not sufficient money to spend on the part of the majority in South Africa. And that contributes to unemployment. And of course, that contributes to affordability crisis.
All right, let's also look at the Employment Equity Amendment Bill with new measures now. The president, while signing it into law, stated that the aim was to promote diversity and equality in the workplace. So how will that also place undue pressure on the private sector? How would it also polarize the labor market and the country, as some have speculated?
So we have seen, for instance, South Africa now is 30 years into its democracy. And it is incredibly important that if we need the buy-in of the majority of South Africans, and if we require social stability, and every economy requires social stability, then we would have to engage in the transformation of the South African economy, and particularly the transformation of the labor market. And the Employment Equity Bill has that in mind, to transform the labor market and bring more Black and young and particularly women employees into the labor market and into leadership positions within the labor market. And we believe that as long as qualified young Black women are employed, and we believe there are many who are currently unemployed, that as long as they are qualified and they are able to take those positions, then we need to do that, because therein lies our long-term social stability and the social contract that will allow South Africa to reach economic growth in the future.
All right. Thank you so much, Mervyn, for joining us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.